I want to run. I want to hide. I want to tear down the walls that hold me inside. I want to reach out and touch the flame where the streets have no name. That's from U2, Where the Streets Have No Name. We want to break down those walls that hold me inside. And so, where are we? We are in the meaning crisis. We are in liquid modernity. We are in a wisdom famine. Where do I go for information? Asks people like John Vervaeke, a psychologist. Well, I go to my phone. Where do I go for knowledge? I might go to Wikipedia, but more likely university. Let's get some real knowledge, learn statistics, history, information, knowledge. Where do I go for wisdom? Silence, because we don't talk about that. That's not really what the university or what society offers. It's considered too much to seek wisdom. And, you know, we have our intuitions. We have this hard science knowledge of empiricism, but we have this intuitive knowledge, which is powerful. It's powerful because we can go for wisdom and approach wisdom. And we need that, actually. We absolutely need that. But we can deceive ourselves. We can fool ourselves. How do I distinguish when it's true intuition and self-deception? And so we're going to talk about some of these things today. And we're going to talk about it in terms of how do I make an argument against the physicalist, the materialist, because that's one of the things I'm pointing towards. I'm not primarily making any religious argument, but I am making more like a philosophical, psychological argument about the reality of these immaterial parts of ourselves, of material reality. What is consciousness? The hard problem of consciousness, for example. And I wanted to start by telling a story from Oliver Sacks, the man who mistook his wife for a hat. And in this series of neurological tales, clinical tales, talking about his patients and their brain injuries, neurological aspects which were not normal. And this one music teacher, a great singer named Mr. P, he doesn't give us the last name, so he uses just the initial P, was coming to him because he was having apparently some visual problems, but when he went to the optometrist and ophthalmologist, he says, you don't really have a problem with your vision. I think you need to see a neurologist. He was seeing students and not recognizing them. He was seeing other people, having a hard time knowing people, but he could see things. He could walk around, he could teach class even. And he was there teaching music, apparently very well. But at a certain point, Dr. Sacks is interviewing and talking to Mr. P, has him take off his shoe, and he's kind of testing his reflexes and touching his foot. How does this feel? Okay, everything looks normal. Okay, Mr. P, you can put your shoe back on. And Mr. P doesn't, and he's kind of looking down, my shoe. And after a minute or two, Oliver Sacks says, want me to help you? Oh, my shoe, right. Is that my shoe? And he's pointing to his foot. No, that's actually your foot. Let me help you. So he helps him put on the shoe. And, oh, of course, yeah, the shoe. Mr. P is nonplussed by the situation. But it was clear that he has a hard time recognizing things. He can see them, He could see that there was something there, but he didn't realize that that was not his shoe. And then as he's getting ready to leave, Mr. P reaches over to grab his hat. And he grabs his wife's head. And she's kind of like, ugh. Apparently she's used to this. She gives him the hat. Okay, here's the hat. He puts on that. And so he's realizing there's this visual problem that's not a matter of biological, physiological capacity, but that the brain processing of the data that's coming into his eyes is at, which is having a problem. And then when he goes over and he says, okay, let's take a look at some of these photos. So he takes some photos when he goes to visit Mr. P later. Takes some photos of his relatives. And what had been kind of humorous all of a sudden is amazingly tragic, because all of his relatives' photos that he puts in front of Mr. P cannot recognize. He does not know who they are. And it says here, I gathered a pile of these together. By and large, he recognized nobody, neither his family, nor his colleagues, nor his pupils, nor himself. He recognized the portrait of Einstein because he picked up the characteristic hair and mustache. And so he can find a detail. He can fix in on details, and details can jump out at him. But to see the whole, he doesn't see the whole. It says here, but it was not merely the cognition, the gnosis at fault. There was something radically wrong with the whole way he proceeded, for he approached these faces, even those near and dear, as if they were abstract puzzles or tests. He did not relate to them. He did not behold. No face was familiar to him, seen as a thou, being just identified as a set of features, an it. Thus, there was formal, but no trace of personal gnosis or gnosis. And with this went his indifference or blindness to expression. He doesn't see people. He doesn't see the persona. He sees a nose. He sees a mustache. He sees details. When he gives him a rose that he has in his lapel, he shows, here, Mr. P, what do you make of this? He looks at it and says, about 6 inches in length, a convoluted red form with a linear green attachment. Yes, I said, and what do you think it is? Dr. P. Not easy to say. It lacks the simple symmetry of the Platonic solids, although it may have a higher symmetry of its own. I think this could be an inflorescence or flower. Could be, I queried. Could be. Smell it. Now suddenly he came to life. Beautiful! An early rose. What a heavenly smell. Die Rosa, die Lilie. Reality. So he's able to sing. He knows a song about the rose in German. But it's the smell that allows him to perceive what it is, the whole. His visual abilities to process that information have been impaired. And okay, why am I telling you this elaborate story about Mr. P in Oliver Sacks's The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat? You might be wondering. And I would suggest that modern Western thought is instantiated in that story about Mr. P, in our whole culture, in our bias towards the left hemisphere way of perceiving reality, of seeing things as mere matter, as only physical realities, only things that we can measure, only things, as Galileo said, that have extension and measurement and weight, not their qualia, not the conscious or the consciousness perceived aspects of the things, the smell, the whole, the pattern within which that thing exists. And we, as a culture, as Ian McGilchrist suggests in his books, and his latest book is called The Matter with Things, we have a left hemisphere bias. We want to lock down onto certainties, things that we can reduce to what is measurable, but we have a hard time seeing the whole, seeing patterns, seeing symbolically, seeing values embedded richly within these material realities. You're thinking, and we're thinking, a lot like Mr. P, not beholding the big picture. And so, let me go to share my screen. And let's see if this thing participates or cooperates, and we've got this PowerPoint. And so we're seeking meaning in myth and story. I'm Dr. Paul Fortunato. And so in this chart, let me make sure it's not being blocked here. We have embodied knowing. So I'm going to argue for a different conception of knowing, which is instantiated in this phrase, embodied cognitive science. And this is a body of work that people like John Vervaeke and others in psychology and neurology and in even artificial intelligence are working, where they are seeing that knowing, human knowing, is not computation. It's similar in many ways to the way a computer thinks, as it were, and computes, but it's through a body at all times. Okay, so the physicalist, which is like the Mr. P approach, where you're biased towards what's physical, what's material, sees the mind as riding in a body. That the mind and the body, they don't have an always already connected relationship. That the mind is just kind of riding in the body, and it can just as easily ride on another person's body, or it can be uploaded into a computer. The mind doesn't have doesn't need a body. Whereas in the embodied cognitive approach, no, the mind is always working through the body. That's the only way it can know anything. And the way that I'm conscious and the way that I'm having a world at all times. So I don't have a mind-body problem because my mind and my body are completely interconnected at all times, as I am with the world. The fact that I'm perceiving the world, that I'm conscious, means that the world is there. I don't have to, like Descartes, prove that the world is there. Okay, the physicalist says that values are fictions. They're nice, fake stories. They're not real. They're lies. They're often pernicious lies told by a powerful person to exploit the weak. That's what tends to happen, and that, whether it's from Freud or Nietzsche or Marx, so many of our modern thinkers basically say that it's all a matter of power, and the powerful telling these stories and these values and putting them into culture so that they can exploit those who are weak. There's a lot of truth in that, but it's not the whole truth by any means. And in fact, we need those values, which in fact, they're always already there, actually. Okay, getting to the embodied side, I'm making relevance realization at all times. I have a set of values in order to even perceive that rose in front of me. When I'm looking at it, like Mr. P, he sees whatever he said, that greenish stem. He didn't call it a stem, he called it a protuberance. He sees the detail. He doesn't know what the whole thing is, but we need to know what's relevant. There's a million pixels of information in front of me, green and red and purple, and I need to say which ones are relevant. And I'm always choosing what's relevant in every experience of reality in front of me at all times. And that's governed by my set of values, by the fact that I need to live, by the fact that I'm attracted by beauty, the beauty of that flower, by the fact that I'm in relationship to those people, those faces. I love those people in my family. That's part of my knowing what's in that picture. And so, as I say there on the left side, you're already making value choices at all times. And so the Mr. P is in fact wrong. And our culture is in fact wrong when it says that values are fictions, because values are always there. They're not, if you think that you don't have a value, you are just lying to yourself. You are the most deluded person in the world. And so that's one of the problems with a lot of thought today. Science claims to be just about discovering the laws of nature. I'm just looking at the cosine of this projectile physics experiment. I'm just looking at the wave patterns. I'm just discovering these laws of nature. And that's true, but even science has its values and its purposes, and it has proximate and ultimate goals. And there is an certainly important value in just knowing the truths of physics, as Newton has done, and Einstein. But we're also doing it with human purposes, and so whether that's my proximate goal of getting some food, or trying to get this car to move using physics principles, or an ultimate goal, but then there's also these ultimate goals which are at stake, which is like, I want to live. I want my life to matter. That's not something that you can measure with physics. Is that therefore a fiction? The fact that your life matters or doesn't? No, that's absolutely the most important thing in the world. That's reality. We can't talk about it in terms of physics or mathematics, as Galileo, he kind of, bracketed out those things so that you could do good physics, and that's how physics is done. But that's not all that there is in the world. And this, therefore, on the left side of the series says is a disembodied, a two-dimensional projection. That's what we think is reality. This is my representation of it, my projection of it. But no, my experience of the world is my full-bodied experience of the world through every part of my body, my hearing, my smell, my feeling, my breathing of the oxygen, of the, and through time. Like I'm 53 years old, like I have memory, I have imagination, I have future, I have all that stuff is going into my knowing of the world. And my being at home where I am. Because this, again, there on the physicalist side, we have what John Vervaeke calls domicide, the killing of home, the annihilation or the destruction of your at-homeness, of being, of belonging on this piece of soil, in this family, in this society. We're always rooted. The fact that we are living means that we came from a people, and that we have a language means that language has been developed over thousands of years, probably tens of thousands of years, and we didn't make that up. That's been developed for us, and we have an at-homeness there, and we need to understand that. We can't pretend that it doesn't exist and say like, no, I created myself out of nothing. Like, I'm sorry, that's not true. And so the embodied cognitive approach is to see myself as close to nature, as always close to my body, as my mind is always engaged in my body, and that I'm also engaged with people, my community of people of the now, the people who are with me, and of the past who've reared me and created the language, the food structures, and so forth that have allowed me to live. And so let's talk about, let me stop this sharing for a second. Mythic narratives. Sing in me, muse, of that man skilled in all the ways of contending, starts off the Odyssey, Homer in his Odyssey, about Odysseus, that man skilled in all ways of contending. Or the Quran, Surah 41. He placed solid mountains on it, blessed it, measured out its varied provisions, all in 4 days. He said to it and the earth, come into being, willingly or not. And they said, we come willingly. And in 2 days he formed 7 heavens and assigned an order to each. And it goes on. God creates. Allah creates the world. And so these ancient cultures, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Muslims, everyone, like the Jews, the Buddhists, have their accounts of the beginning of the world. What is the world? Where did it come from? And in the Odyssey, it's a god or a goddess, a muse singing in me. That's giving me that authority. So it's not just me singing it. And it's about what? It's about this man skilled in the ways of contending. The human being is made for contending and wants to have skills. And so the way these stories are told tell us where we came from, what the world is, what the human being's place in the world is, where is the human being going, what matters about that human being. In the Quran, it's the creating of the varied, measured mountains, the earth, and the 7 heavens, and in order, the 7, an order assigned to each. And it looks here like there's 4 days and there's 2 days, that's 6 total days. Similar to, not quite the same as in the Bible in Genesis. And so we have these accounts of the world, of what the human being is, of what human life means and what it's bending towards, what is the arc of history. And the world presents itself to us as a riddle. It's kind of meaningless, or its meaning is you have to work to get it out. And so ancient Greek, ancient Muslim, ancient Jewish cultures have worked that over centuries and thousands of years, and there's a lot of wisdom embedded in those texts. Not that they're all true completely, or I don't agree with all of them, but it's worth reading these and studying them and understanding where our own culture has come from. And when we experience something as meaningful, when the world makes sense, when my life makes sense, when my experience of this day, Saturday, makes sense, fact and meaning are brought together. And that's what we want to do in our lives, is to bring fact and meaning together. And the opposite of that, as Sartre said in his novel, is nausea. When you look at the thing in front of you, the scene in front of you, and it does not make sense. And that can be a shock, and you just don't understand what's happening. And I'm thinking, I don't know, the thing that just came into my mind was September 11th, and you look at the screen and you see a building burning and you see it falling down and you cannot stop looking and you just don't know what's going on. The entire world that you thought made sense, in a sense, is crumbling, and you don't know what that means. What does this mean? This World Trade Center, New York, powerful economic forces which seem so unassailable and so powerful, and now are being torn down by some attack. Who is the attack by? What does this mean? So yeah, you have to rethink your entire world because you're nauseated. You just don't have the capacity. But then as time goes on, you process things and you see patterns and you see, this is where this came from. And so, and that's, what those early Muslims did and those early Jews and Greeks did. They looked at their world and they were trying to make sense of it, and they see patterns, and they looked at the stars and this must be a god, and this must be a story about Sagittarius, or this must be the little bear And here's the North Star. So for some reason, why is this? Like, this is a crucial star. Everything's revolving around it. And they see these patterns. And they understand the world. And so what does that mean? I have this slide where you see a pattern. And okay, so here's a physics experiment, and you can buy this nice, cool experiment toy where you can study waves and how they behave and like their velocity and their amplitude and so forth. And these are patterns that work every single time. They are the same. And this experiment would work on Earth. And if I took a spaceship that could go at light speed and went across this galaxy, it would work on the other side of the galaxy given the same conditions. It's the same material reality everywhere. That structure of being is built into the structure of reality. There's patterns in the world. And I'm obviously making a physical pattern analysis here, but I would suggest, I want to get out of this, that screen sharing has stopped. Okay. That there are story patterns as well in the universe. And there is a meaning and meanings, and we've got to wrestle out these meanings. And I'm not arguing for any single one of them, but I'm arguing that we need to study them, and especially these ancient ones. And whether that's like these stories, but also science itself, where science is itself a story, and there are revolutions in science where we used to think that the atom was a simple nucleus and a bunch of electrons rotating around it, the Bohr's atom. But then as time goes on, we realize, no, there's actually quantum mechanics. And so how do you even know where is that electron at any given moment? And like things get way more complicated. So we have a revolution and we realize, no, that simple pattern is more complicated. We need to keep doing more experiments to see what the pattern is. And that's true knowledge, and we're making sense of the world there. So let's take a step back to talk about the Hemisphere Hypothesis. And the Hemisphere Hypothesis is by this fellow Ian McGilchrist, a Scottish neurologist, humanist, who's written some wonderful books. I'm a big fan of his. And his hypothesis has to do with the two hemispheres of the brain and the culture. And I've already actually referred to it, but let's go back to my PowerPoint. I got to get better working on these PowerPoints. And let's look at the divided brain here. And as you see, the left hemisphere, we can say some things about it in relation to the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere it corresponds to the predator mode of our species, where we're locked down on a single detail. Okay, I've got a deer in my sights, I've got my bow and arrow, and I'm focusing on that one detail, and I'm blocking out every other detail. I have my relevance realization where I'm realizing what's relevant right now, which is that deer. And I'm blocking out all the other details because they're going to distract me from the one thing I need to focus on. That's what the left hemisphere is good at. That's the mode that the left hemisphere is going to give us. And that contrasts with the right hemisphere mode, where I'm looking out for the predators or mates who I'm looking all around me. I'm seeing the big picture. I'm open. I'm radically open, even like looking in my peripheries and things that I don't even really see, but I'm kind of like sensing them. And that's the right hemisphere's mode, where it's this radically open, big picture mode. Okay, let's look at the left hemisphere mode again. So that's the small picture, blocking out anything that's not related to that, whereas the right hemisphere is looking for larger patterns or gestalts. I'm going to talk about gestalts in the next frame in a minute. The left hemisphere feels certain. It's got this certainty about what it knows, and that's useful because you need to act. So when you're ready to like kill your prey, you need to like act. You can't wait. Whereas the right hemisphere, it's perceiving meanings, it's perceiving symbols, it's seeing patterns. It's not certain. It's kind of guessing sometimes. Left hemisphere has a single meaning. It controls. It has a radical control of that meaning, and it doesn't want to have any like kind of questions of that. Whereas the right hemisphere is letting it flow. It's contemplative. It's more in the what we can call Taoist mode. The Tao, where you have the yin and the yang, and the yin, that female aspect, that female mode, which is more like this right hemisphere mode, is of doing nothing, of just taking it in, and of not controlling things, of radical uncontrol, letting it be. That's the right hemisphere mode. And then in Greek culture, and Nietzsche is good at detailing this in his book on the birth of tragedy, we have the mode of the left hemisphere matching that of Apollo, the god of reason, the god of light, the god of like nice, solid knowledge, very good at science, that kind of thing. Whereas Dionysius, the Greek god of wine, of partying, of emotion, of strong, powerful emotions, even orgies, is more corresponding to the right hemisphere. This is the creative, the imaginative. So we have two ways of attending to the world, two ways that the world manifests itself to us. And we need to make sure we're aware of these two modes and aware how they interact. And we need both of them at all times. And we sort of move back in between them seamlessly. That's how we live. But McGilchrist's thesis, his hypothesis, the hemisphere hypothesis, is that Western culture has been skewed, biased, too much focused on the left hemisphere mode, and it tends to not trust the right hemisphere. It tends to not trust these stories, these patterns. And like it looks at those patterns, those, says someone like Nietzsche or Marx, those patterns are lies. And they're lies told by powerful people to exploit the weak. That is all it is. And yes, it's true that sometimes that has happened, but that's not all it is. We need those patterns. We need those stories, those gestalts. Let's look at Gestalt for a second. Do I have? Let's see if this works. Yeah. So here's an image of Gestalt principles. Gestalt is a German word which means form, shape, pattern. And there's a whole psychology based on Gestalt. And here are just some of the key ways that the Gestalt works. and they are the way we perceive and we attend to the world. And the first one there is called closure. So instead of me just seeing pixels on a screen, like a million pixels, some of them white, some of them blue, some of them black, some of them gray, I am seeing closure. I'm seeing a shape. And I don't know what that shape is, but I could like imagine that like a heart. If I kind of imagined, like filled in the gaps, so to speak, I give it closure. Is that there? In a certain sense, no. If I just use my left hemisphere, it's not there. But it takes the right hemisphere to perceive, yes, there is a shape there. And I'm seeing, as I said, a heart. I mean, you can also see it as a skull. I think that part of this does require the imagination, filling in the gaps. So that's closure. Then we have similarity, where I'm looking at different objects, these three organisms. And if I just look at them with the left hemisphere, or like Mr. P, I would just see very specific colors and fields of color and a tooth or a tongue, an eye. But if I look at them big picture-wise, I see they're the same, they're very similar. They're all cats. And even though they look very different in detail in terms of their colors and their shapes, I can see they're definitely all cats. This is a group of animals which are very much related. And so much biology relies on this type of Gestalt way of looking. And then there is common fate. So we have birds flying in a school or a flock. Do the birds fly in schools? I guess it's a flock. Okay, this is a flock. And I don't know if those are egrets or cranes, but in any case, I can see a bunch of them are all flying in the same direction. And so they are a group, even though they're all over the place, they're all different, they all different shapes. But I can see, no, these things are all a group. They're moving in the same direction. They're one. There's something one about that group of birds in spite of the differences. And then going to the bottom left, we have the figure, ground, and focus. And this is the crucial principle of Gestalt, that at all times, unless I'm in nausea where I can't understand what I'm seeing, when I understand what I'm seeing, I'm always seeing a figure on a ground. But sometimes that figure ground is ambiguous. But in any case, 90% of the time, actually, it's not ambiguous. 90% of the time, like, we know what's in the figure, what's the figure, and what's the ground. Like, there's my hand and that's the figure, and then the ground is what's behind it. Or I'm the figure, and then the ground is behind me. And clearly, in this photo of the moon is the figure, and the ground is behind it. I mean, you could imagine that the ground would be the moon, and the figure is the sky, as if the moon was behind the sky. And there's all kinds of neat, like, drawings where those things kind of like switch back and forth. You're not sure which one's the ground, which one's the figure. But in any case, the principle holds in either case. And then we have proximity, and as a pattern, as a meaning. And I would say this photo of the family has two aspects related to proximity. One is that they're all proximate to each other, they're all next to each other. That's a group, that's a one family, that's a one thing. There's a unit there. But there's also a proximity of the plate to the person, so that you can see which plate belongs to which person. I mean, if I was Mr. P, I would be like, well, there's a bunch of plates there, I don't know which one belongs to who, but by the rule of proximity, by this principle, it's very easy to see which plate belongs to which person. And then I'm going to move this thing for a second. And then we have the ants, the continuity. And they're all individual ants, and they're all different. They have different attitudes and shapes and positions. But they're all walking on a path. There's a pattern there. There's a continuity. And if we saw this moving, it would be much clearer. But they're all walking in a path. So here we have the way that Gestalt principles work. And so good. So let's take an interlude to think about this in terms of a song, the song that I had begun with, which is the U2 song, The Streets with No Name. Is that it? Streets with No Name? And let's see if I can get sick to work. Okay. And I'm going to try and do this in a lower note so that I don't sing so high. I'm just making sure no one is going to interrupt here. So, I want to run. I want to hide. I want to tear down the walls that hold me inside. I want to reach out and touch the flame where the streets have no name. I want wanna feel the sunlight on my face. I see the dust cloud disappear without a trace. I want to take shelter, poison rain, where the streets have no name, where the streets have no name, where the streets have no name. Still building, then burning down love, burning down love. And when I go there with you. It's all I can do. Cities a flood, our love turns to rust. We're being blown by the wind, trampled in dust. I'll show you a place high on a desert plain, where the streets have no name. Oh, where the streets have no name, where the streets have no name. Still building, then burning down love, burning down love. And when I go there, I'll go there with you. It's all I can do. It's all I can do. And so, as we were saying earlier, let's look at some of these lyrics. You know, I want to tear down the walls that hold me inside. And we've got these walls and holding us in, and they're sometimes false walls, false desires, or false rules. And I want to reach out and touch the flame where the streets have no name. Feel the sunlight on my face. And I want to take shelter from the poison rain. And so, let me go to the last part here. We're beaten and blown by the wind, trampled in dust. I'll show you a place high on a desert plain where the streets have no name. And I'll go there with you. And so, I'm actually struggling to come up with a good connection to the story here. But I mean, one of the things is just that we do get self-deceived, and we do get these walls holding us inside. We got to break them down. But how do you break them down? And our society is biased towards rebellion. Like, oh, I'll just rebel against rules, and that's going to create freedom, and I can do what I want. I can be who I want. But to really be who we want, we need rules. We need patterns. We need stories that mean something. And in an absence of those things, you have a meaning crisis. We have liquid modernity, and we're like, and people sometimes they yearn for rules, and they join the military. So like, okay, give me some structure here, because like I'm sort of like thrashing around. Like, what do I want? I don't even know. And sometimes the things that I want, like, they've been shaped into me by my cell phone. Like, you know, I'm addicted to some game or something, and is that what I want? Is that my ultimate want? And I need to get to my deeper wants, and that takes work. It's not easy. We got to fight against the culture to some extent, because the culture is powerful. This liquid modern, the black mirror, is constantly bombarding us. And so, read, contemplate, develop the right hemisphere, look at the patterns, contemplate music, contemplate poetry, contemplate a beautiful mountainscape. This is where we need to go. And so one of my goals is to get you addicted to reading long books. and get myself addicted to them, because I am addicted, but I get distracted. I get so pulled into the Black Mirror and notifications. We all need this. So I'm looking at my time here. Okay, I don't want to go too long here. Galileo's error. So I love Galileo, brilliant guy, scientist. But he said this: mathematics is the language with which God has written the universe. Mathematics is the key and the door to the sciences. And those are true. But it's not just math. The universe has the language of math built into it, and again, that's why like those physics experiments work anywhere in the world, and even if you went to the other side of the galaxy, and the math principles work too. But so do the story principles, the meaning principles, the perception of what matters, and what fits, and what makes a fulfilled life. Because all of my knowledge is in the context of my purposes, my human purposes, and my human desire to live. Because if we don't have a desire to live, we're in trouble. And so we have to have not just those measurable data that Galileo is focusing on. We need qualia. We need the qualitative things, the smell of that rose, the taste of feta cheese, the taste of coffee in the morning, like that. There's something there. Consciousness. And even the qualia. I mean, sometimes the qualia is just the smell. And that's important, but it's not as important as adverbial qualia. The here-ness of here. What does it mean to be here, this place? What is a place? What is a home? What is the meaningfulness of meaningfulness? Like these adverbial types of qualia are also real. They're not lies, they're not fictions, as the left hemisphere bias will have us take, as the Mr. P view of the world, which involves brain damage, as that would see it. And when I'm reading the Aeneid or the Iliad or the Odyssey, those books tell me where I'm from and where I'm going. And like the Aeneid told those ancient Romans, like where they're from. They were from, in fact, this was a lie, but they saw themselves as from Troy. They had an important origin, and they have this origins because they really respected Greek culture, and so they wanted to build themselves onto that Greek culture, so they did. Okay, it's a lie. So some of these stories, they have literal lies in them, but they reveal a lot of truth about the human being as well, about order, about law, the Stoic ideas that were available to Virgil. What I love, Roma, the city of Rome. Obviously, there's negative aspects to that imperium where you're conquering all these other people and you're sort of justifying it because of your gods and everything. Yes, okay, those stories are important to be interrogated and questioned as well. But those ancient Romans needed Roma. They needed a sense of my culture, my land, my people. And so there's a popular mistaken idea, which is that you have material reality and they give rise to consciousness. And I guess, let me try sharing my screen for a second here with the drawing board. Oh, do I have a pencil? And, just to sketch this out as a sketch, so you have material things like, rocks and trees and animals, and then you have a human body that's material. And then somehow that material thing, first it's matter, material, and somehow that gives rise to an immaterial reality, consciousness. which we were just talking about, the smell of feta cheese, the here-ness of here, the meaningfulness of meaning. Are those immaterial realities real? I'm saying they are. We're conscious of them all the time. In fact, consciousness is the only thing we're conscious of, actually. So it's real, but they're saying that first there was material things and they gave rise to immaterial things. Okay, how did that happen? And when did that happen? And the reality is that there's no answer to that. Because the answer is that consciousness, the immaterial and the material arise together at all times, I would argue. And they're constantly immersed in each other. And there's a school of philosophy, I mean, I was talking about Gestalt, psychology, and also relates to philosophy. And there's a school that's related to that called phenomenology. Phenomenology that comes from people like Husserl and Heidegger, and in the Christian tradition, John Paul II was a phenomenologist. These people have developed phenomenology as a philosophy to help us make sense of this, to talk about this relationship between the immaterial and material world. And so, yes. And you know, this is just one example. Take music. Where is music? Is music in me? Here I am listening to music. Or is it out there? And the reality is music is always both in me and out there, otherwise it's nowhere. Is music real? Music is one of these patterns in the universe, and it's the same everywhere. And the ancients had a real sense. I mean, they called it the music of the spheres, that they saw the movements of the stars as kind of music. And it's not literally true, but there is a truth there, that these patterns correspond to each other. And yeah, so we want to get at these things, and also to critique the idea that here I am, I'm the subject, and then there's the object, and that these are two totally separate worlds, and there's a kind of wall of separation between them. And I'm arguing with the phenomenologists that no, that these things are always together. The fact that I have a world means that the world is already connected to me. And the fact that I am conscious means that there is a world. I don't have to prove that there's a world. I don't have to account for the world. The fact that I am conscious itself means that there's a world. And so this is, you know, very much the work of Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who did a lot of great work. He died at a young age, unfortunately, but before he died, did a lot of great work on our perception of beauty, our perception of art, and what does that mean? And I think that has a lot to do with what we're doing here. And so, and that, you know, I'm having a world, and I'm not having it just at one moment, but through time. I'm a time-bound being. I have a past, I have a future, I have potential, which doesn't exist yet, but that's real. I have a past, which also doesn't exist, but that's real. And our thoughts, in a certain sense, are not just in here, they're out here also. That consciousness connects us. The popular idea tends to be that we're nothing but matter, that debunking of everything, that we're a bundle of senseless particles pointlessly, helplessly, mindlessly colliding in a predictable fashion, like a bunch of billiard balls, and like this billiard ball hits this one, then hits this one, and it's just all predictable by scientific physics and chemistry. And aside from the fact that billiard balls actually don't work that way, even in reality in terms of physics, nor does our bigger reality or more complex reality work so simply. There is a consciousness. There is this immaterial reality. There are these patterns built into the substructure of the universe that we need to address. So we'll pause it there and give us more next week. Think about Mr. P. Think about the streets with no name. Think about how the immaterial and the material are always intertwined, always engaged. My consciousness and the reality the world that I have. I'm a being that's alive, that wants to live, that has desires, not just thoughts. Am I mainly a thinking being or mainly a desiring being? And I'm kind of going towards that we're more of a desiring being. The human being is the being that it's the rational animal, as Aristotle said, but it's an animal that wants things and that loves things. And that love it tells you who you are. It tells you what you are. And if we don't know what we love, well, that's a problem. We need to think about that a lot. We need to cultivate what we love. We need to protect that. We need to set up even patterns and even rules to protect the things that we love so that we don't hurt the things that we love, which we tend to do so much. So more on that next time, and we'll see you soon.